Well, thanks for coming in your lunch hour. I hope what I'm going to tell you isn't going to give you indigestion, okay? But let's see. Well, I've written about the suffragettes in the past, and I'd always concentrated on what they did in terms of their militancy. Remember, these are the women who fought the vote in a very insistent, outrageous, provocative, direct action kind of way. So I talked about their campaign, which really started with shouting at meetings, interrupting politicians, went right through to burning down churches and attacking works of art over a period of about 8 years. So it was very controversial and deeply unpopular. So I'd written about that. I'd also written about how modern they were, how they invented political merchandising and marketing and branding. They branded their campaign really beautifully. And more about that in a moment. I had a colour scheme of purple, white and green, and they branded and merchandised their slogan, Votes for Women, in all sorts of different ways. So I found that very kind of sexy and exciting. And then I got to thinking about, well, who were these amazing women? I mean, what kind of person would do that, would make that journey, would become a suffragette? Because, make no mistake, it was the most unpopular campaign, political campaign of the 20th century. It was a coming out moment for anybody who said, in terms of conversation or by wearing a badge, that they were suffragettes, because they were so detested and so loathed. I mean, all they wanted was the vote, but the sheer effrontery of them, not asking for it nicely, but demanding it outrageously and noisily and cheekily and violently, was something that people just couldn't stomach. So I was interested in who they were, where they came from, what their biographies are, what their backstories are, what their prehistory is. And I was interested in their mums and dads and their siblings, their brothers and sisters, their neighbours and family groups, because you had to have your family on your side if this was going to work. And your family had to be quite extraordinary to back you, because they're going to get a lot of flack from neighbours and colleagues and family members if you support your daughter embarking on this kind of campaign. So I was really interested to get kind of the backstories on them. Of course, the lucky suffragettes, if you like, who persist and have a long suffragette career, are extremely fortunate. They've got supportive husbands and fathers, etc. But some women who found that their fathers and families were not going to support it, you know, they had some very tough choices. They either sort of shut up and stop it, or they leave home. They're thrown out, they're cast out, they're disinherited, they're disowned. And many of them had that experience. Some marriages rocked and ended, and some engagements broken off. Quite a lot of women involved in the campaign lost their jobs. And in one of their papers called Votes for Women, there's a regular feature where suffragettes are writing in, asking in the Situations Wanted column in the classified ads section, explaining they need a job because they've been dismissed from their post. And you could be dismissed for even having a suffragette leaflet on your desk. Not that you've been spotted smashing a window or anything like that. It was just the fact you were interested, you'd been to a meeting, was enough to get you dismissed, with mostly pretty disastrous results. So I was fascinated in the strength of character and the strength of a family unit that condoned this kind of behaviour. I was also interested in diversity. I was interested in all kinds of women who were getting involved in this. So I did a lot of digging away at that kind of story, and I found some great examples of diversity. I was interested in it being looking at the regions rather, and understanding how nationwide it was, which it was. They had branches all over the country quite quickly, in Scotland and Ireland, in Wales and all over the United Kingdom, all over England. So that was a measure of its success and organisation. And they even had shops selling their merchandise, suffragette shops selling purple, white and green stuff all over the country. So that I thought was pretty sexy too. And I was interested in working class women because they've been very much marginalised in this story. It was often said that the suffragettes were just middle class hobbyists. They weren't interested in working class women. Nothing could be further from the truth. So lots of things to go and look for and to weave into this story. Well, I have to talk about the ladies on the screen, first of all, by saying these are undoubtedly the stars of the campaign. On the far left is Sylvia Pankhurst, who's an artist and designer. She gives the WSPU, the militant campaign, the look. She designs exhibitions, she designs logos. She is responsible for the branded look of the WSPU. Her sister next to her, the next image along, she has a first-class degree in law, but because she's a woman, you couldn't be a lawyer then, which was irksome, to say the least. So she gave her a great strategic thinking and logic and planning skills into the campaign, and she was their big thinker, really. And Mrs. Pankhurst, the mother, who got them all together and founded the Women's Social and Political Union in her parlour in 1903. Great charismatic woman. She could fire up a room. She could light up a room very quickly. All of them could, actually. All the Pankhurst girls were charismatics. She's a tiny creature. Her shoe size was 2. But she's like a cannonball when she got going. You know, she's amazing. And then Annie Kenny, who is a mill girl from Oldham, who joined the campaign very early on. She becomes a very senior member of the campaign. She's a poster girl for the campaign. And she can reach into working class communities and recruit women in the way that the Pankhursts couldn't, always. So she's a big part of the story. And she was very pretty and the subject of many different postcards which women collected at the time. This is the context the suffragettes are operating in. Mummy's a suffragette. Is your wife a suffragette? You know, domestic chaos comes when women are involved in politics and want the vote. How dare they? And there's hundreds of these flying around, different designs, thousands of them being sent around the country at this time. It's the golden age of the postcard. People kind of made arrangements to see each other with these postcards. London had 12 postal deliveries a day. Those were the days. And they were a bit like tweets and texts. You could make an arrangement in the morning and you could confidently expect your postcard to be delivered and meet your friends in the afternoon for tea or whatever, and certainly in the evening. So it was a brilliant means of communication. So, you know, civilization is going to collapse if women get the vote, and certainly domestic chaos reigns whenever they want to, whenever they're asking for it. This is the first suffragette postcard I ever bought, and I thought it was just so daft. I liked it, actually. Suffragettes who've never been kissed. And this is to frighten young girls from being involved in the campaign, because they said, you know, this is what happens when you don't take your life seriously. And if you're involved in politics, you're going to be so unattractive to men. You're never going to be kissed. You're going to have a very sad and unfulfilled life. So the message is, you know, it's the sexual frustration of an unfulfilled life that's driving these women into asking for the vote. So there we have it. An apocalyptic vision when women vote. This is what's going to happen. There's about 10 in this series, which are fantastic, hilarious and daft, of course. I love the idea of what happens when women vote. They have their friends around. How dare they? They have cigarettes, they smoke, they have chocolate, they just hang out and just relax while their husbands are in the kitchen getting very red in the face and coping very badly with a bawling child and the washing and the everything. So the reversal of roles here is a horrible prospect. It's horrible. It's a topsy-turvy world, and it's to be stopped early in its tracks. And we've got to make sure this doesn't happen. And when women vote, they're going to ask men to marry them. They're not just going to kind of sit around and wait, hoping it's going to happen. So they're going to kind of take the initiative, and that's going to be horrible too. This is Annie Kenny dressed up to lead a procession. As I said, she could reach into working class communities everywhere, all over the country. And these are the clothes she wore when she worked in the cotton mills of Oldham. She was a half-timer from the age of 8. When she was 13, she became a full-timer. And these were her mill clothes. She was wearing clogs with steel tips, a skirt and sort of shawl, and another shawl's been put over her head. So, you know, it's a really powerful, rather haunting image. And it was very successful, and thousands of copies of this image were sold. Suffragettes could be really young. They could be teenagers. And this girl here was 17 when she started her suffragette career. She worked in her dad's shop in Westminster. He had a kind of a chemist shop. And she got involved, and with her father's blessing, she got involved. Lucky girl. But she did change her name to spare his embarrassment. She was born Jessie Spinks, which is such a nice name. And she called herself Vera Wentworth, and that's how she was known. That's her prison record knows her as Vera Wentworth, but her real name was Jessie Spinks. So you could be really young You could be in your 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. And even feminists in their 70s, who'd fought all sorts of interesting campaigns in the 19th century, in their 70s and early 80s were joining the suffragette campaign, adding their imprimatur to this movement and marching alongside the Pankhursts, going to Parliament to talk to politicians, which is to insist on the vote. It wasn't nothing to do with talking, it was demanding. So across the age spectrum, women are getting involved in this struggle and adding their own special and unique qualities to it. I like this image because it shows you how the movement is kind of bursting out all over the country. The map shows where they had branches, committee rooms and shops. It's a brilliantly organised campaign. So everything was like a military manoeuvre. They left nothing to chance. They had lots of volunteers to make this happen. They paid their organisers £2 a week, but a lot of the legwork was done by unpaid volunteers from all class backgrounds, not just middle-class girls with nothing else to do. And it was well resourced. They had a great couple who were the business managers, if you like. They provided a lot of the seed money. And they happened to be a generous, kind, noble, intelligent, a wonderful couple called the Pethick Lawrences. Fred was a barrister, so he gave lots of legal advice, and lots of his money was used to bail out suffragettes from custody until their cases were heard at court. So a lot of his personal fortune was going to support the campaign. And Emmeline, his wife, was the fundraiser. She raised the equivalent of £3 million in 5 years. The woman could not stop raising money. She has dozens of ideas, which are brilliant at filling up what they call the war chest, which is their campaign fund. Annie was having so much fun in the suffragette campaign. Her sister, Jessie, has come to run one of the London departments. And here she is sitting in front of the map here. She's got a senior position too. So much nicer than working in a cotton mill is to actually come to London and be part of something really vibrant and very, very exciting. This was the marketing and merchandising. The colours featured very prominently. They started off quite small in 1908 with badges and rosettes and sashes, but very quickly there's a vast amount of merch available to those women who want to buy it. At the top end, if you were really well off, you could have a purple, white and green car upholstered and decorated with suffragette logos. So that's high-end marketing. You could get suffragette bicycles. You get votes women's cigarettes and chocolates and marmalade and all kinds of foodstuffs. You could get jewellery, you could get dresses, you could get slippers and shoes and hats decorated. I mean, whatever you wanted, somebody out there would make it for you. And all the big department stores in London and the major cities would stock purple, white and green clothing and accessories for suffragette customers. There's a tea set there that was on the market in 1909, and there are still a few around, but they're extremely rare and very expensive. Well, the suffragette campaign I haven't got time to go into too many of the kind of year-on-year details, but initially from moving away from interrupting meetings, women were banned from political meetings because you never know, they look quite nice, but they could be suffragettes. They could be so troublesome, they would just get up and unfurl a banner and shout votes for women, and interrupt politicians in their making speeches. So women were banned, and to protest that, they would get onto the roofs of those buildings where they were banned, and they would have banners, and they do rooftop protests, like prison protests. They started it really. And when the police and the firemen would try and hose them down off the roof, extremely dangerous, the suffragettes got so cross, they just ripped the slates off the roof and just chucked them down on the police below. So, these protests could end up extremely violent and dangerous. And of course, it all adds to their bad reputation. They stalked politicians as well. They would follow them around and just make their lives a total misery. They would go to them, they would follow them to church, and they would buttonhole them and grab hold of them and say, when are you going to give women the vote? They would follow them when they were playing golf. They'd hide in the bushes and jump out and say, when are you going to give women the vote? So they were really absolute pain. That was kind of slapstick and funny and not so bad. But then when the government promises to seriously consider a bill and to give it time in Parliament and allow it to become law, when they renege on these promises 3 years running, things start to get really difficult, and the suffragettes think, okay, we're going to move on a bit, we're going to move the action a bit further down the line. And it's extraordinary for me to be saying these things because these were just straightforward, ordinary women. You know, all they wanted was the vote, but they found themselves caught up in this most extraordinary battle between the police, the government, prison authorities, and sometimes members of the public would attack them. You know, it was a really dangerous thing to be a suffragette. This is one particularly dark day in 1910. Suffragettes were waiting to hear about a bill that was being debated in Parliament, just waiting to hear when the legal timetable was going to be drawn up for it to become law. Asquith, who's the Prime Minister, just completely torpedoes it and says, oh, no, well, haven't got time for that. We'll think about it again next year. And this is after a lot of peaceful lobbying and campaigning. So they set off in groups of a dozen from Caxton Hall where they were meeting and waiting. And they try and get into Parliament. And the police are ready for them. They know they're going to kind of make their protest in Parliament Square. And Winston Churchill was the Home Secretary, actually recruited a lot of policemen from the East End who are used to dealing with violent thugs. And they were there, but in plain clothes. They just looked like members of the crowd, members of the public. And they were in disguise, really, in two ways. They were wearing badges which said Men's League for Women's Suffrage. So they were pretending they were supporters, they weren't. And they and the uniformed police, like you can see here, and mounted policemen, actually, their mission was to handle that situation in such a way that women would never come back and protest again, which meant that women were crushed against the railings by police horses. They were punched, kicked, beaten, hair pulled, clothes pulled off, really badly assaulted. And about 40 women were taken down various side streets around Parliament Square and sexually assaulted by uniformed policemen and these agents provocateurs, and the crowd were encouraged to join in. So it's a terrible day. It's 150 women are involved in this kind of assault, physical and sexual assault. Caxton Hall, where they'd been meeting, becomes like a field hospital. Suffragette nurses with suffragette sympathies rushed there, and doctors rushed there to do some very basic first aid, but it was an awful day. And it triggered riots the following weeks where hundreds of women are being arrested. Some of them are being discharged, but a lot of them are going to prison. Holloway fills up, and the others just bust around the country because there's no room in Holloway. They've got to go to Liverpool, Bristol, Newcastle, Manchester, anywhere, just to cope with them while they're going to be charged and their sentences are going to be handed down. It's such a difficult day. It's such a dangerous, horrible moment. Mrs. Pankhurst said, I don't think we can do this. We can't go to Parliament like this because it gives the police too much time to molest, manhandle, all sorts of things are going on. So what we need to do is we need to have protests where women are arrested immediately. So that's going to be like guerrilla campaigning. And she said, we're going to have to wage guerrilla warfare on this government because we cannot trust the police to police these demonstrations properly. And so guerrilla warfare, the campaign goes underground in the autumn of 1910, and violence and vandalism breaks out all over the country. And the idea is, smashing windows, yes, they stood there and waited to be arrested, because that would mean they went straight to the police station. There's none of this pushing and shoving and kettling, which still happens at demonstrations. It's a kind of a quick protest. They're going to go to prison. They don't mind. I mean, they don't want to go to prison, but they don't mind doing that if this is going to further the cause. So this is a tipping point. And this day, the 18th of November 1910, is remembered ever after by suffragettes for the rest of their lives as Black Friday. People sometimes say to me, who's your favourite suffragette? And I say, well, there's about 200 of them and they're in this book. But to pick one, I have to pick Edith Rigby because she was just so gorgeous and outrageous and unconventional. She was a doctor's daughter and a doctor's wife in Preston. And she was absolutely single-minded in getting the vote and focusing on working class women. She comes from a nice, comfortable middle-class background, but her interests lie in votes for working women. And she recruits local women, she takes them down to London, they get involved in all kinds of protests and demonstrations. And you just had to take one look at Edith to know how unconventional she was. She didn't wear the normal clothes of an Edwardian lady, corsets and pretty dresses and that kind of stuff. She wore her own clothes that she made herself. I suppose we think of her now perhaps as the first hippie because they're really big baggy dresses, kind of homemade dresses. She made her own jewellery. That's all a bit bohemian and pretty, but very weird for the times. Nobody else was dressed like that. And she wore sandals all year round. People thought that was weird. And she chain smoked all the time, and that was most unladylike. So that's what Edith was like, you know. And she does the whole suffragette number. She goes to Parliament, she protests, she breaks windows, she burns down houses. You know, just point out that whenever suffragettes burnt down a house, it was always empty. You know, they always wrecking the place first. Their owners were still unhappy about it, but no human life was lost. So for the last few months of 1913, Edith's on the run from the police. Even her husband doesn't know where she is because she's got out of prison, because she's been on hunger strike and she's been force-fed, and she was released on a special licence. And she hides in Ireland in Galway, and she's there not communicating with her husband or friends at all, and just waiting to slip back into the country to carry on doing more militancy. So Edith Rigby is a really interesting woman, and I mean there are 200 women in this book with incredible stories, and they are doing things that I don't think many of us or any of us would be able to do now. It required a really particular mindset and phenomenal sacrifice and courage. I like this photograph because it looks really modern. It was taken by Special Branch. It's a surveillance photograph. There's a man hiding in a van in the exercise yard or in a box in the exercise yard at Holloway Prison, and he's just taken her picture. She's got no idea she's being photographed. Multiple copies of these prints would be sent all over the country to police stations to look out for women because they were very mobile. They would arrive in places with aliases and in disguise. They moved all over the country. They were like soldiers, really, in a campaign. And they would turn up and they would smash windows and they would put phosphorus bombs in pillar boxes, and they would vandalise sports facilities. They would get acid and burn in golf greens, no vote, no golf, that kind of stuff. And so they were a tremendous problem to the police. And Special Branch had lots of detectives following them and taking photographs of them to try and get a handle on who they were and where they were going and what to do when they turned up. Grace's father was a clergyman in Norfolk, and he knew what she was up to. He didn't try and stop her, but to make life a bit easier for him, they have a very distinctive surname. They're called Marcon. She's called Grace Marcon. So she had an alias. Quite a lot of suffragettes had an alias to spare their father's feelings, even though they knew they were suffragettes. And she called herself Frida Thomas. And she has an interesting career. In London, she works as a gymnastics teacher and a masseuse. But when she's on suffragette missions, she's obviously not able to work, and she's kind of on the run from the police a lot of the time. So Grace Marcon is a tremendous character, and she was about 20 when she got involved in this campaign. Well, being a suffragette was hard. You know, if you tried to make a speech outside, perhaps on Wimbledon Common or wherever, you know, the crowd could be really hostile, they could be very abusive, they could be very vulgar, because it's mostly male, rough crowds who are kind of following you around to just bait you, really. They would perhaps throw rotting fruit and vegetables, lumps of cold cabbages, rocks, which suffragettes were often stoned. Sylvia had experiences in the East End where dead cats and dogs were thrown at her. So it was horrible and dangerous. And again, it's hard to imagine doing that now in front of a really rough crowd. Of course, in those days, it was even more unimaginable. So there's a lot of that. There's all the stuff that's going on in prison, which is being force-fed. The reason why they go on hunger strike is they say we're political prisoners. We're being treated as common criminals. What's happening? Men who are campaigning politically and are being arrested for their political crimes, their campaigning methods, are given special status. Right back to the 19th century that was happening. Why aren't we being given this status? And the government would never give in on that. So they went on hunger strike, and hundreds of women were fed by force. The worst way, there are three ways of doing it. I'll just go straight to the worst, which is where liquid food is poured in a funnel, down a tube, which is pushed down your throat, down here to the top of the stomach. So it's just poured straight into your stomach. It's milk with raw egg, or it's milk with brandy, or beef extract, that kind of thing. And you tip back in your chair, you're held down by 4 wardresses, and that's poured into you. Imagine, the gag reflex would not be happy about this. And suffragettes had their vocal cords damaged, had their teeth knocked out in the struggle. While it's being poured in, they're vomiting it straight back out again. Sometimes it got into the lungs, and they had pleurisy and pneumonia. So it's really dangerous, because with pneumonia, this is before antibiotics, and so you could die from pneumonia, and a lot of people did. So it's torture, it's torture by no other name. But hundreds of them were doing it. It's their decision, nobody told them to do it. And the decision is, we're going to force the government to give us the vote. So the stories of hunger striking and force feeding are really powerful recruiting tools to women who hear these stories, and they're going to have a response to that. They might not want to go out and do militancy, but they're going to give some money, they're going to give some time, they're going to be involved in the campaign. And these stories, these moments were really important, because it galvanised women to support the suffragettes. They might not like militancy, they might not really approve of it, but they felt it was a means to an end, a means to a very, very important end. So there's a lot of scary stuff, dangerous stuff, unpopular stuff you've got to kind of develop a thick skin about. But there's fun as well. They're very big on parties, they're very big on tea and cakes. That was a big part of the kind of recruiting process. And here they're having a suffragette sleepover. This is when it's census night, when the government sent round to count the population. Suffragettes said, we pay taxes, we have no voice in the making of laws, so we're not going to be counted. The government threatened to fine them and send them to prison. Didn't matter. And 4,000 women dodged the sentence. They had a party wherever they went on the night. They gathered groups together. They hired caravans and went out on Wimbledon Common and spent the night out there and had a party. They had smoking parties. They went roller skating all night. It was a lot of fun, and making a really important political point. No voice in our legislation, so we're not going to be part of your official headcount. So I like this because it looks like it was fun. I was very lucky to meet this lady in the 1990s when I worked at the Museum of London. There she is as a young suffragette. She's called Victoria Simmons in that photograph. She's about 19. She came up to London and she broke windows in Whitehall in 1912. She went to prison for 2 months and she went on hunger strike and she was force-fed. She came up with her sister Winnie. Winnie managed to get away, so Winnie went and sang songs every day outside Holloway Prison to keep Victoria kind of company. And when Victoria went back to Clifton, which is where she came from, her local clergyman, the man whose church she attended, saw her selling a newspaper in the street, and he was so disgusted by the fact she'd been to London and she did what she did, he just spat in her face, which is not what you'd expect a clergyman to do. But people felt able to make those kind of remarks and those kind of behaviours. I met her in the 1990s when she was 100. She's 100 in that photograph. And she was still a suffragette, actually. She still had that suffragette twinkle. She still had that fire in her eyes. And she'd been a political campaigner all her life. She got married. She was the first woman optician. She got involved in all kind of animal rights campaigns. And her last campaign for the ordination of women priests, she lived to see that happen, and it was great. And the very first time I met her, well, the only time I met her, I spent a whole day with her, and it was such a thrill to actually meet somebody who'd done it, and I could see completely how she had taken that position. I said, well, let's go and have some lunch, shall we? And I mean, she's perfectly able, she didn't need a walking frame or anything, she's perfectly fine living in a flat on her own. And she said, well, it'll have to be a vegetarian dish, because I've been a vegetarian since 1897. So, that's how she was. And I said, what's it like living here in Brighton, in Hove? She said, oh, it's not very well. She said, but it's full of old people. I think she thought she was about 50, actually. She didn't realise she was 100. So it was really nice to meet her and to just kind of spend some time with somebody who'd actually been and done the business. And the last photograph I want to talk about is this one here. And this was taken in 1967. And these are the moderate campaigners and the militant campaigners. They've been brought together for a photo shoot. The Observer have gathered 13 of them. They can get together on one particular day for a big feature that was in the Observer. And I love this photograph. I just love it because it's so colourful. It's so vibrant. And it's about their personalities. I think the colour of their clothes reflect the vibrancy of those characters. And I just want to point out a few of my favourites, actually. So I'm just going to move over here. Now, this is like the formal photograph. It's all kind of, everything's okay here, right? But things have relaxed a bit by the time we get to this photograph, right? Loved burning down buildings. When she's interviewed years later, her eyes lit up. You know, she's really excited, talking about when she burnt down these buildings. So she's in and out of prison. She's on hunger strike. She's force-fed. She was somebody who had food go into her lungs. She had pleurisy and pneumonia at the same time. She could have died. She was only 20 when that happened to her. And when she was charged in court at Bow Street, the magistrate sort of sent her down for 6 months. She said, oh, well, I'll be back. You know, next time I'm out, I'm going to burn down 2 buildings a week. You know, that's my project. So she's completely kind of irrepressible. And because she was so small, she could be smuggled out in laundry baskets. And what they often did was they were out on special licenses. They're supposed to sit in this place, this designated address, to get better, to put on some weight, and just wait to be rearrested. That was the scheme. That was the police idea. Well, they're not going to do that, are they? They're going to kind of recover a bit, going to put on a bit of weight, just be looked after in like a nursing home context. And then they're going to get out. They're not going to wait to go back to prison and carry on the whole business again. So they would arrange for parties if women would come to see them, see how they're getting on, flowers and chocolates, all that. And there'd be a body double amongst that group. So a number of times she got out by swapping clothes with somebody, a young, small person, and she would just walk past the police who were on 24-hour guard outside the premises where she's being looked after. So very often she just walked straight past them. Or she goes out in a laundry basket. And she had this brilliant ability, and that, she's so small actually, she can be a child. She's often dressed as a boy. And that's how she gets away from the police. So she had she had a very lengthy record, but she hardly served any time in prison because she's so good at getting away. I love her. And this is Mrs. Gwen O'Brien. Gwen O'Brien was one of Mrs. Pankhurst's bodyguards because there's about 40 women who were part of the bodyguard who used to mob her to try and stop her being arrested by the police. So Gwen had many fisticuffs with the police to keep trying to stop Mrs. Pankhurst being arrested. And the last lady I want to talk about is this one here. She's called Una Duval. Una Duval was, again, total career suffragette. She got married in 1912, and she made a press release before she got married and said, I shan't be saying the words I obey in the wedding service. And everybody got completely agitated about this. The Archbishop of Canterbury said, well, you won't be married if you don't say I obey. She said, well, I'm not going to say it. So she carried on, she got married, she completely kind of ignored the Archbishop of Canterbury, and she just went ahead with it. But that gives you a clue as to how strong-minded they were, you know, how dedicated they were, how visionary they were, and how insistent and persistent they were in their views. And she was part of a suffragette family. She married into a family called the Duval family. So the Dugdales and Duvals numbered about 6 female suffragettes and 2 husband supporters. Now, they couldn't join the WSPU, but husbands were really important in protecting their wives, their female relatives and friends from attacks from any different direction. And so this important family, the Dugdales and Duvals, were part of this whole family of suffrage. And I think all the women who got involved in suffrage felt they were part of a family. And you really needed to feel that to actually be able to keep doing it, because it was hard. It involved a lot of sacrifice and quite a lot of suffering. Okay, that's all I want to say about the images. I'm very happy to take questions if you'd. I'll try and answer them. Thank you.
My question was, you've obviously been talking about this and researching this for a very long time, and in the time you've been doing so, and more recently, have you found the conversation has changed, if your audience has changed, people more receptive, more understanding?
Yes, I mean, I've been involved with this subject for a long, long time, and for years there was no love in the room for the suffragettes. People couldn't stand them. Even academics, even historians were quite dismissive of them. They believed the lie that it was just middle-class women looking after their own interests. But now there's quite a lot of love in lots of rooms where I talk about the suffragettes, because people can hear really the full story and understand about their characters and their strengths and their courage and their commitment. And I think they're people women that lots of people can be proud of. But the mood and the attitude has shifted as the full story of their involvement and their struggle actually emerges.
Hi. So I've got a question. So I kind of feel right now with the Me Too trend, I feel that we are perhaps living through another pivotal moment, as we did 100 years ago with the suffragettes. I don't know if you would agree with that. And my question to you is, do you feel, I mean, I guess I've got two questions. One, I wonder whether these ladies would feel proud of where we are right now as a society, or whether they think it actually hasn't moved on enough. Because I personally feel we're still quite far from true gender equality. And my second question to you is, with this pivotal moment that we're living through now with the Me Too trend, do you feel this will result in a significant move towards kind of genuine gender equality in the kind of world, I guess, these ladies hoped they would achieve?
Well, I mean, excuse me, that's two good questions. I think that the suffragettes thought a lot of this would have been sorted out by now. You know, I think one of the slates, one of their wishes was for equal pay. They were talking about equal pay, you know, at the turn of the century and before. So they'd be very disappointed about the iniquity of unequal pay, and they would say, I'm sure, how did you let this go on for so long? Don't forget, in 1970, the Equal Pay Act was passed. It's supposed to be right across the board, fully implemented by 1975, and it still hasn't happened. So they think that was weird, which I think is code for shockingly bad. I think the Me Too moment is going to actually, I think both of these issues are going to result in something, because I think so many people are affected by it. It can't just be it can't be just papered over, it can't be ignored, it can't be brushed under the carpet. So many people have the issue of unequal pay and sexual harassment. I can't see that nothing can happen. But I think what we do, and the suffragettes would say, well, how did this go on for so long? Because suffragettes were campaigning for the vote to stop sexual harassment, and they said, well, we haven't kind of got that yet. I think they would like us to have Mrs. Pankhurst's slogan at the top of our minds: deeds, not words. Stop talking about it. Stop having committee meetings about it. Just talk about it, but make a strategy as to how it's going to happen. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to bring this? I'm going to deliver these changes. Because talking about it just isn't enough. And that's what Mrs. Pankhurst would love us to revive her slogan, deeds, not words. And I think we perhaps ought to think about that.
Thanks, Alice. I suppose along the deeds, not words action, you talked about essentially Asquith going back on his promises, says, yes, we'll do it, and then not, and then the suffragettes feeling that they had to escalate the types of actions. To what extent do you think that actually, if you want real change, that extreme actions actually take you to a place that dialogue just can't do? Is it something, is real change, can it be achieved with dialogue, or do you in a democracy actually need to demonstrate your frustration, anger in more sort of vocal, extreme manners? I
mean, I don't know if I've been taken over by suffragette spirits. It's possible that I have, but I don't think dialogue's enough. I think extreme action, whatever that is, whether it's a general strike, women going on strike and not doing any work at all, I don't know, but it's got to be strong, because talk is so easy. It's so cheap. You know, it's how do you translate that into something? And although governments never want to agree or concede, you know, they always give in to violence and extremism eventually. They just have to manage that really carefully. But they will always have to make some concessions, because you can't have, you know, the country at war with each other. This just can't go on. So I think the suffragettes were right to pursue this campaign. They suffered enormously because of it. But in the end, the net result of it was was that during the war, when they realised that a lot of soldiers had accidentally lost the right to vote because they were away from home and hadn't been registered, it's just a technical thing. Once they realised that had happened, they had to quickly re-enfranchise men because it's a sort of a PR nightmare. They then decided, well, all these men are fighting, that we've got a large number of men who haven't got the vote. We've got to enfranchise them because they are putting their lives, laying their lives down for our country and our empire. So soldiers are, re-enfranchised. 21-year-old men are re-enfranchised across the board. But it's also like, how are we going to reward women for war work? Because war work done by women was critical. The home front, that war was fought and won by women. So they had to make some kind of remark about that. And that meant that women over 30 with certain property qualifications got the vote. And I really feel that if the suffragette hadn't pushed the struggle to the top of the agenda, that wouldn't have happened. The thought of another suffragette campaign starting up again, if they didn't give women the vote, was just couldn't face it. There's so much to be done once the war was over, that dealing with that as well. And also the suffragettes would be so invigorated by the moral high ground of saying, hang on, what more do women have to do to get the vote? We've fought the war. The men have been at the front, and we've fought the war at home. So I think the suffragettes created a mood whereby women had to get the vote. I mean, it was unfortunate that they weren't all enfranchised on equal age thing. But if they had been, women would have been in the majority. And that politically was just couldn't be contemplated. I mean, we think now, well, why not? But at that time, going from like no votes women to having women in the majority in the electorate, that was just scary. And it was just very unappetising. So I think the extremism of the suffragettes actually counted for something when it came to the Representation of the People Act, and that's how women got the vote. Sorry, it was a long-winded answer, but it's quite a complex question.
Any other questions?
Hi there, thank you so much for joining. Where did your personal interest in this topic come from?
I worked at the Museum of London, and they have this really important world-class collection called the Suffragette Fellowship Collection. And it's such a touching story because when the vote was won in the 1920s, I always imagined what they did with themselves after that really exciting campaign and the war period, because they were all involved in all kinds of war work. And I thought, and now I know what they did. They collected stuff to remember the campaign. They had this fellowship to remember the Pankhurst and to remember militancy, and they gathered all the banners and posters and stuff, and they made this huge archive. And they had a little museum in Cromwell Road, and you could just go along and kind of look at banners, and it was like a very amateurish thing, but it was a collection that was growing and growing and growing. People were donating their hunger strike medals, their jewellery, their everything. And we had this at the Museum of London. I used to just go and spend hours kind of messing around in there and looking at stuff and picking out photographs and just learning about them, finding names to put to these photographs. And so I kind of immersed myself in that, and I kind of started getting the kind of compulsion to write about them and just to work out what the stories were. And I curated an exhibition in 1992 called Purple, White and Green, which talked about marketing. It was the foreground of the campaign, of my exhibition. The backdrop was really militancy. And I just kept with it. I had a break from writing about them. I did other biographies of women. And I kind of came back to them thinking, yeah, right, okay, let's get biographical with this lot and find out what was, how this all came about. So my book is a collective biography of 200 suffragettes. And honestly, I think I am possessed by them because every day I think about them. I kind of think, I wonder what Edith Rigby would have done about that, What would Edith have done, So, no, they're really inspiring. They're amazing. I love them.
In the last couple of elections, we've seen the Women's Equality Party come to more prominence, at least, than before. What's your take on that movement, and is that the sort of modern embodiment of the suffragette spirit, or is it maybe a pale imitation? And what would the suffragettes do in the current political climate?
Well, I think the suffragettes would say we should have had the Women's Equality Party a long time ago. I think they'd support them. I think they would endorse a lot of their policies. I think they'd like what they're doing. They'd approve of it, certainly. And I think they'd want us all to vote for them. And I think lots of people say to me, what should I do? I did an event at WOW at the Royal Festival on Saturday, Women of the World. And I talked about, and a young woman said to me, oh, what can I do? What can I do about this? And I said, well, join the Women's Equality Party. And sadly, she said, I've never heard of them. So my mission would be, my advice to Women's Equality, get out there and get known more, get some candidates, get some money, and try and think about adopting some of these suffragette tactics, because I think that's what lots of women want and need.
So we talked about, before you started, we talked about technology and the impact that can have. And one of the themes that you brought up was how organised the suffragettes were. Do you think that technology is possibly hindering the ability to get out a consistent, organised message to achieve an individual goal? So, for example, Women's Equality Party, are there too many voices asking for too many different things?
Yes, I think one of the virtues of the suffragettes was that, they were very clear. They weren't democratic, they weren't interested in committees. They made policy and they wanted their supporters to follow the policy. And it's quite straightforward in a way, because I often think one way of making sure things don't happen is to have a committee, because it just takes so long, it becomes a talking shop, I'm sorry, but it's so frustrating. It just ends up to being all about the committee, not about the project and the goal. So I think they need to have a single issue or a big identifiable message, and to push that, because that will bring so many people together. One of the reasons why the suffragette campaign was so diverse and so huge, really, is the fact they're going for the vote. And that brings a lot of people to that campaign. And very importantly, great diverse talent. And it's talent that has so many impacts. It reaches into so many aspects of the organisation. So I think a single issue campaign is something that really has a chance of success, because you've got numbers, you've got diversity. And that's where I think results can be gained more quickly. By the way, I think the suffragettes would have loved social media. They would have loved tweeting and Instagram. They would have loved that. They would have really embraced that. They took the technology that was available at the time to the max, so they really worked on that. So they'd think, hey, you've got Twitter, you've got all this stuff, what's happened?
Sorry, I've got one last question. Yeah. So I haven't read the book yet, I'm looking forward to reading it. So you mentioned 200 women?
200 suffragettes, yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, are there any prominent male, can we say suffragettes?
Well, yeah, they couldn't, well, I call them...
That you came across.
Yeah. Well, no, there's some good guys. There are lots of good guys. Edith Rigby's husband was a doctor, Charlie, and he was just like the ideal husband. He just let her get on with it. He never stopped her. He was worried about hunger striking, being a doctor, but he didn't ever try and stop her. And a lot of the time, when she was just in Ireland, he had no idea where she was. And a family friend wrote and said, oh, I'm so sorry about Edith. It's all very trying for you, isn't it? He said, I don't want your sympathy. I don't need it, because I back Edith in everything she does. She has the courage of a lion. And I don't have the moral courage that she has. So I will back her whatever she does. Now, that's quite an admission for a man at that time to make. So there are lots of good men like Charlie Rigby, but they suffered. Their reputations amongst other men thought they were like women, men in dresses. They said they were unsexed. They were sex traitors. So some of their careers suffered, their reputations suffered, their friendships were broken. But there are some good men in that book too.
Thank you so much, Diane. I think a lot of us really excited to read the book. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.